Curiosity. Kill the rat. Curiosity. Kill the rat.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Curiosity Killed the Rat.
Woo, we did it.
Yeah, episode 5. This thing's still going. It's exciting. This is a science podcast where we just chat science shit and it's good fun. I'm Kate. I study neuroscience.
I'm Matt. I do the sounds. I make the audio. No.
I feel like our intros get more awkward each episode.
God, what's it going to be by like episode 10 or 15 or something like that? It's just going to be us screaming into the microphone
like,
with no
Hi,
substance.
I like science.
Hello.
Oh.
Ah! And then that's my representation of sound.
It's okay, sorry. I'm going to stop and be serious now because it's not just us two here today. We actually have another guest, which is really exciting. Benji, the astrophysicist or astronomer. You want to be astronomer? I'm gonna play by your rules.
They're the same thing.
Apparently, they're the same thing.
Astronomy and astrophysics. There's actually all of the like journals are like some are like Journal of Astronomy and Astrophysics, some are Journal of Astronomy, some are Journal of Astrophysics. They're all talking about the same stuff.
Interesting.
It's actually weird. So like the definition of astronomy / astrophysics is studying anything that's not in the Earth.
Right.
But also astronomers study the Earth because it's a planet. So it's anything that's not in the Earth or the Earth if you're studying the Earth from the perspective of someone who's not in the Earth.
Right.
So I don't know, but I work a lot on satellites and simulations, space explosions. Those are my kind of areas of expertise.
Explosions.
That's
really cool.
Really cool.
So yeah, I thought you'd be excited for this
Yes.
one, Matt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I could hear it from like the bushfires one. You just started riffing on like how great astronomy was, and I'm like, ooh.
It is the best science because it's the science of just like literally everything else. Like
Yeah, I'm outnumbered 2 to 1 here.
you're
I still think
outnumbered by
neuro
the
is best
entire
science,
universe,
but-
mate. Because
I mean,
that's
brains are cool.
all of astronomy.
Brains are cool, but you know, you guys can love space. I also love space. Like that's also interesting.
I mean, who
to me.
doesn't love space? Name one person that doesn't look at space and be like, the fuck, you know?
Like probably a lot of people, actually.
I have a friend who's got like a space phobia.
There you go.
They're just
Oh.
like too big, too scary. Like some people are afraid of the ocean, too big, too scary. Space is bigger.
I wouldn't want to go on a rocket ship. Like I don't like aeroplanes. Can you imagine sending me into space on a rocket ship?
Well, I
like,
mean,
that's
there's a
like
difference
aeroplane
between
phobia.
appreciating something and wanting to be like a part of it and in it and that sort of thing, you know?
Eh.
I don't know. Can you imagine sending Kate to space on a rocket ship?
No, I want to go to space myself. She ain't taking
Okay,
that.
good.
No, I'm the
Yeah.
kind of person that if like a one-way trip to Mars came up, I would just put my hand up without even thinking
Jump
about
up
it.
straight away.
Oh
Really?
yeah, 100%.
I'd miss you. Don't go to Mars.
That's all right. Skype's a thing. Or
With a
Zoom.
6
Or
minute
From
FaceTime.
Mars. Don't know about that. Anyway, what are you going to tell us about today, Ben?
Yeah, what do you want to know? I've got a topic prepared.
Sure hope
Are you ready to hear it?
Because I have nothing prepared, so I'm ready to hear. I don't know what we're talking about either.
Ruh-roh. Okay.
Are you excited?
I am
You set?
Lay it on
so
me.
excited.
All right. Today we're going to be talking about
Dun, 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 drum roll.
simulations.
Ooh.
I should be excited, but just the word simulations alone, it's kind of like, what are we simulating? Like, I can simulate robot voices with my voice.
that's
I don't know why
really
that's
interesting.
the first example I thought of.
That's
Like,
cool.
What sort of simulations are we talking? Like
I don't
space
know.
ones, obviously.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that means.
What do you mean? You don't know what is a simulation?
Well, like, I know what a simulation is, but like,
Well, I mean, I was telling you guys, like, just before we started recording this, that, like, I'd been spending these last few days just rewatching a bunch of Rick and Morty. And the episode that I literally, like, just finished watching before I jumped on the phone was the M. Night Shyamalan one, where it's all about being in a simulation. So,
oh,
You're living in a simulation.
Is it that sort of simulation?
Inside a simulation.
Like a
you know,
matrix?
inside another
simulation.
simulation.
I don't know. I just figured that, like, the thing that most people don't know about astronomy is, well, they kind of do, but they kind of don't think of it. It's really hard to do experiments. Like, it's really hard to build a star and see how it evolves and watch it collapse.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to build a star.
No,
If
you
told
need
me-
a lot of gas. You need a lot of time. We don't have the gas.
I don't know, I'm vegetarian, I eat a lot of beans.
Still not enough. Stars
enough?
are real big.
Okay, noted.
Real big. So yeah, instead there's like 3 kinds of astronomers. There's like the theoretical people who are all your astrophysics, big whiteboards, solving equations, figuring out, I don't know, what would a grav wave look like? How would we detect it? There's
And
your
that's not
observers.
what you do?
There's observers who kind of like look at stuff and like, here is a star that exists. What can that tell us about stars?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm more of a simulationist. So I spend a lot of time
Simulationist.
building hypothetical models of things that could or could not exist, comparing them to observations, comparing them to theory, and trying to like bridge the gap that like you get when you can't actually do real experiments.
Yeah, because I have thought about that before. Like, how do you design experiments for something? Like, my experiments are easy to design. I work with rats and I can make them physically do stuff. But you can't really do that with stars.
No, you can't. So basically, I thought I'd bring in like a pet example just to play with, just to see how we're...
Yes.
So like, yeah, generally you do a simulation when you can't either afford to build a real version of the experiment, or it's unethical, or it's really dangerous, or it's just impossible. So I thought, let's say if we wanted to figure out, let's do the experiment, what would happen if we had like a real life Noah's Ark? Like if you built a big boat out of wood and put 2 of every single animal in the earth on this boat, waited 40 days, who would survive?
I mean,
An
I don't see the
ultimate
issue
Animal
of doing that
Kingdom
experiment.
battle royale.
Yeah, right. Definitely not ethical. Definitely not affordable. Definitely probably not legal. So instead, we've got to make a simulation, right?
Okay, no, that's fair.
So when you're designing a simulation, the first thing you want to do is figure out as much about the thing that you're simulating as you can get. So for this, we'd probably want to know what are the food chains, what do each of the animals eat, how long can each of them fast for, maybe what the relative speeds of each one is. Then basically we kind of like get our computer, code that all up, make like a sort of rules-based inference model. So maybe like you've got your arc, you've got that as the kind of map where all these animals are kind of like sitting on. They're walking around, they're chasing after
like
each
the
other.
Sims, but it's a boat.
It's The Sims, but it's a boat. So usually when we do simulations, we try to like abstract out as much detail as possible. So with Sims, they try to make them realistic. They're giving them arms and legs. They're having them walk around and stuff.
I just had this realization that like Sims is short for simulation.
Yeah.
Is that a thing that everyone else has realized long before now, and I'm just like very late to the game?
Well, here's the thing. I knew that. However, I may have only realized it about a month ago. So, you know, you're not completely alone on that
I
one.
feel a little bit better. But...
No, this is great for listeners. She's just beetroot blushing right now.
Man, that's not good.
Yeah, yeah.
Whoops. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue on.
Sims
so,
are
Sims are a simulation,
of
of real life. Continue.
real estate. I don't know what they're a simulation of.
I don't know.
A simulation of
life.
just,
Life.
Life.
Yeah.
for a lot of
Living your
people,
best
just
life.
outliving their own sadistic tendencies and that sort of thing.
That's
Yeah,
true because
sure.
it's illegal or too dangerous or too expensive
Exactly.
to create the dream lives
To
and
own
houses.
a house.
In real
Yeah.
life, if
To
I
have a
built a
door.
swimming pool,
Considering we were
didn't
all
have a ladder
born,
there, tried to
you
kill
know.
everyone, that's frowned upon by most people. I do it on
I
a
was going to
computer.
say because we're
I-
all like millennials, Gen Zers, we can't afford a house or a family or
Or
a
a
life.
life.
So we have to simulate it instead.
Oh, no.
And that's why Sims is so popular among our generation.
Shit.
Yikes. Anyway,
Fantastic. Yeah.
Benji, continue. Sorry
So, yeah.
for that interruption where
No,
I
it's all good.
realized that
I
I
love
am
it.
the dumbest human on the planet.
No, this is fantastic. It's great radio. Yeah, so you've got, I'd imagine them as being like little dots, little like checker pieces that just kind of chase after each other. You've
Are
got
these
the
the little animals?
little
in
animals
in the boat?
in a
Yep.
boat.
Okay.
kind of like checker pieces on your computer. One's running away, one's running towards it. And then you can let it run for 40 days and then you can see what the outcomes are. So it's kind of like you start with all the theory that you know. You create this imaginary world. You let it run. You see what it makes. And then you compare it to observations, which is probably hard for the Noah's Ark example. It's not like you just see a big old ship pull up on the coast of West Australia and like a couple of tigers and a bear walk out. You're like,
I don't know, Matt. Freeman gets some interesting...
I don't know. We get a lot of cruise ships come through with some like real interesting characters coming off it.
Yeah. Some interesting tourists that I wouldn't hesitate to call animals.
Similar vibes. Yeah, the next part is like, because you've already built this, you can then run it again, see how things change. Maybe you want to like cater for the herbivores on the ship. You just throw a bunch of hay in there. See if that changes the outcomes of what's going on.
Because herbivores exclusively eat hay.
Yeah, I don't know.
You can speak for that as a vegetarian. You only eat hay.
Yeah, I only eat hay.
Man, how good? How good is hay?
Are you eating things other than hay, Matt? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, as an omnivore, I also sometimes eat, I don't know.
Other smaller omnivores.
Correct.
So you put hay In the boat?
Yeah, and then we might want to see how that changes the outcomes of like, because they don't really specify, do they, how they feed the animals on the Ark.
No, they just kind of vibe.
Magic.
They just kind of hang out, I suppose.
They just kind of hang out for 40 days and 40 nights, and then however long extra they're chilling on the boat before the rains kind of fall away. It's been a while since I've read that particular.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I will say
section.
this for the Bible. I won't say I'm not out here to bash the Bible, but they wouldn't pass the rigorous scientific peer review testing of their methods section. They don't go into enough detail in their methods section about how the animals were fed. That would not pass peer review, rigorous scientific peer review. Sorry.
Just hang out, not enough detail.
Let's just...
Okay, jumping back into it.
Yeah, you asked me a question before. You're like, what even is a simulation?
Yeah.
So you thought robot voice and then The Sims. Matt, when I say simulation, you thought Rick and Morty. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, kind of like a VR world, something like that. But I guess if I had to think about it a bit more in the context of what you actually do, I can imagine just a simulation is just a thing that predicts things, right? Because yeah.
So I think of it as my favorite personal analogy. Did you ever see that episode of Futurama where they had the "What would happen if" machine?
No, I didn't.
No, sorry.
So
I haven't
good.
watched
So
Futurama.
basically, the professor invents this "What would happen if" machine, and then the whole episode is just a vignette of all the different characters, and Bender's like, "What would happen if I was 10 feet tall?" Presses the button, and it shows a short thing about Bender being 10 feet tall and fucking shit up.
That sounds like a fun episode.
It was a fun episode.
That's cool.
But yeah, so that's kind of the way I use a simulation is more okay, we don't really know the physics of what's going on in these stars. We just see the stars or how they explode, and we can just see what that looks like. So then what I do is I kind of okay, if we had this physics, what sort of galaxies would we see having these sort of stars? What if we had this physics? What if we had this physics? And then I can, match those things to what we do observe and say, well, what we observe best matches this physics, so it's probably this physics.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really specific and complicated, what are they called? I don't know, calculators, I guess. You just give them... No, there's something...
No, I'm ready. Go on.
No,
please.
there's a word that I'm
Your
looking for. It's
research.
not calculators. I just can't get it in my brain at the moment.
Simulators?
Where you feed it a certain amount of parameters and rules and I guess a program, an algorithm. It's an algorithm. It's
Program's
just
great.
a really
Algorithm's great.
sophisticated algorithm where it's hey, if you give it X, run X through X times this plus this plus this. These are the possible rules. It runs it through that, and then you see what happens to X after it goes through those parameters,
Yeah.
But it just does that with a lot of different variables, with your various rules for different physics. What happens if it gets dropped? What happens if it gets hit by something else? What happens if it gets heated up, cooled down, gets bigger, gets smaller? What happens within these pre-established rules of the algorithm or the universe, I guess. But
This is really good. So I've actually got a definition in front of me because I thought I should bring one in a little bit.
Thought you should bring up some. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So there's a few different ones. Some are more loose than others. So the loosest you can get is it's the use of computers to model things. So just, anything. But then it's some people are no, because then if you have an equation and you make a computer solve it, that's not really a simulation. It's technically a model.
That's a calculator.
Yeah.
As per.
hey,
So then the next level is okay, it's using a computer to model things with rules-based inference, which is the thing
That's
that you
a
were talking
term
about
I've heard before.
that's a
And
term
then-
I've not heard before. What does that mean?
So it's exactly what you were saying. There are
Okay.
rules for what happens based on what the last thing was. So maybe in my Noah's Ark example, the rule is if an animal sees an animal that it's prey, it'll head towards it. And maybe
Okay.
my other rule is if an animal is prey and it sees a predator, it'll run away from it.
Right. Gotcha.
And so from that, you can infer that if I don't know, I'm trying to think about animals that eat each other. If a tiger sees, what do tigers eat? Zebra.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's-
If a
it'll
tiger
run
sees a
towards it.
zebra, it'll run towards it in your, and so you
In-
can
on
infer
my
that
arc.
based on
It'll
the
be
rules.
really, really chaotic arc.
Yeah, I don't know how they house these animals. Are they
well, I mean,
Anyway.
nowhere in
Anyway.
the Bible does it say that the ark was free range. I mean, they were probably
I hope
all
it was.
caged or at least barn fed,
You'd hope.
Ugh.
Yeah. So then, so it's using the computers to model things, rule-based inference. Usually they do it to things that can't be actually solved with maths. So I don't know. The most famous example is there's something called the 3-body problem. Have you heard of the 3-body problem?
I have not.
Okay. So basically, if you got the Earth and the Sun, and you just let them free fall, let them orbit into each other, if you know where they're starting off and you know how fast they're going, you can predict their orbits for the rest of time.
Yes.
Yeah. If you do it with the Earth, the Sun, and a third body, so if you're doing Earth, Sun, Moon system,
Yeah.
and you start it all off and you let it all go, you know their initial positions, you know their relative velocities, maths can't do it. Maths cannot predict where these 3 things are going to be for the rest of time.
Because chaos, right?
Because, yeah, lots of chaos.
Yeah,
There's
no,
like...
I think I remember seeing it in like a Vsauce video a while ago. The diagram they had was like the swinging pendulum thing, and then they added like another arm off the end of this pendulum and then released it, and then that extra spinning element of this made the actions of this pendulum too unpredictable and too chaotic that it was like impossible to predict.
Yeah, and so that's the thing that you did look at was a simulation. It wasn't a solution, but it was just someone pretending that it was happening, doing little rules for like what's going to happen next at each time step, maybe a bit of randomness, seeing what happens, and then looking at how it changes with time.
True, because I guess a simulation doesn't necessarily have to be done by a computer or anything like that. You could have analog simulations, so to speak.
Ooh, that's interesting. But
So
Then is it no longer a simulation? Is it then a
Demonstration?
replication?
Because, like, for example, another one that could come to mind, you know, that old classic physics experiment of, you know, it's a bit fucking extra and dramatic and that sort of thing to demonstrate conservation of momentum, where the physicist stands on one side of the room and they have a bowling ball on a string,
yeah.
and they hold it up to their face and they let go, and it swings out and swings back. But unless they push it, it won't hit them in the face. You could say is that simulating conservation of momentum, or is that just demonstrating?
I feel like that's just demonstrating.
Is a
that's just
demonstration
demonstrating.
different from a simulation, though?
I think the thing that makes it a simulation is that you've got something representing something else. So, like, in my Noah's Ark example, all of these, I don't really have animals running around in there. I just have little objects that follow rules and behave like animals.
Well, so then is a simulation just defined by what you're saying these different parameters represent? So do you know the things that you see in shopping centers sometimes where it's like the well, and you like spin your coin around it and it goes round and round and round and round and round and round until it eventually falls down like a whirlpool? And a lot of them are being like, hey, this is how gravity works. This is what planets are like on an orbit. So is that no longer a demonstration and now a simulation of what orbits are like simply because they've defined it as, hey, yo, this is a planet, and that's a gravitational center that it's going towards?
Yeah, it sounds like it's getting really philosophical. Are we happy to take it there? Are we ready to keep going down this weird philosophical rabbit hole?
I mean, if that's the way the coin's falling.
Oh, great. Okay. Sweet. We're doing it. So there's like certain ideas in philosophy when it comes to like defining things, right? Definitions are hard. So often like things will define things in terms of their relationships to other objects. So if you wanted to define a cow and you were, depending on what you were doing, you might say a cow is a 4-legged mammal that eats grass. And as long as you've got the eats grass part of thing, you can get a grass eating simulation going pretty well. So with your whirly thing in the supermarket, you might have the object in the middle being something that's giving a gravitational force, the object in the outside being something that's slowly like orbiting down into it. You've got those 2 parameters down. You can define like sort of that as being the object falling in and that as being the object that's sucking things up. And that kind of works, right? Like, for the purpose of the simulation, as long as you've got the relationships between the objects right, it doesn't really matter what the objects are.
Even though it's like real gravity that's causing it, like it's not but gravity isn't simulated in that situation. Like gravity is literally what's pulling the coin down.
Yeah.
It's real gravity.
You're using gravity to simulate the gravity.
Yeah,
but it's not.
So you're simulating the.
It's not gravity simulating necessarily the exact gravitational pull of Earth, which is what's being implemented there. That's Earth's gravity being used to simulate gravity as a concept and how it warps. space-time, making like a well in it. At least that's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Would that count as a simulation?
I think it does. Yeah, because I've heard like
You've
the other
heard it here,
example,
folks.
like if you wanted to simulate sand castles, sand piles, one thing you can do is just drop like dye on top of each other, and they'll kind of like avalanche. So you can kind of like make up rules-based inference models for that. Like if you've got 4 die in a stack, they scatter, giving 1 die to each of the squares next to them, and that kind of stuff. So like, yeah, there's a lot of examples where you can kind of like use something else to represent something else, and whether it's real or in a computer may not matter.
There we go. I
There
think we
you go.
answered the question. So yes, I guess analog simulations only took us 20 minutes to get to the definition of a simulation. Analog definitions. What am I saying? Analog simulations exist.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Hell yeah.
Now tell us what you do with your simulations.
Presumably
mean?
digital,
Or, I don't
not
know.
analog.
Analog? No, I'm all computers.
No, I know. I mean, like, we've defined a simulation.
Yeah. So
What's-
for me, it's what I kind of work with is really cool. It's basically there was a team out of Germany who've built basically a model of the universe, tracking it from when it was a hundredth of its size now. The universe is expanding to the present day. And so basically, they've tried to get as much physics as they can in there. They've got like how stuff clusters, dark matter, dark energy, how galaxies evolve, how mergers work between galaxies, how stars explode, how that like blows apart gas and stuff. They've tried to make it as real as possible with the idea that you can kind of treat this as sort of a virtual observatory.
Huh.
So basically, when we look at the universe, space is big.
Space is big.
Space is
Most
quite
things
big.
are far away.
Mm-hmm.
So even like big things like galaxies, they just look like specks. We can't know much about them without doing some really serious science. And even then we can only get like maybe 1 or 2 numbers from it. With a simulation, depending on its resolution, you can know the past, present, and future of every single star, gas particle, molecule.
Matt's face right now is just like lit up like a kid that's walked into a candy store.
That's because it's cool, okay?
It's really cool.
Really cool.
I wish this was a video medium, not just an audio medium, and the world could see your face right now because it was just like this starstruck kid.
Oh boy, that's super cool. What percentage of astronomy would you say is simulation versus observation?
So like there's a lot of challenges for simulations, I suppose. For challenges for observation are literally like what we mentioned. If something's really dim or dusty or distant, then it's hard to see it. And also like, there are different ways to measure certain things, and depending on which calibration you're using, you might get answers that are like twice as big or twice as small. That's a whole other can of worms. With simulations, the problem is more like in what we put into it. So are we sure that this is how this sort of physics works?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, how much of... Because there would be a lot of sort of factors that would go into generating those rules for your simulations, but do a lot of those rules come from previous simulations? Like, are you just...
No. Maybe. Okay.
How much are we working off assumptions that may not be correct?
Yeah, we're definitely making assumptions that may not be correct. Can confirm 100%. But the other thing is, like, we're getting better. So, like, people keep...
God, I hope so.
people keep making new simulations all the time. But, like, yeah, so some of it is observation. Some of it is from other, like, smaller, more zoomed-in simulations. So, for example, if you want to simulate the universe, you're not going to be able to simulate every single star in the universe.
Damn. There goes my weekend plans.
Yeah, you can. So, like, at the moment, the simulation I work with a lot, shout out to Illustrious. Shout out to the Illustrious team. Shout out to Illustrious TNG. Stands for the next generation. Not joking.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, so it can only get resolution boxes of down to about 1 million stars.
Is that small? Is that big? I don't know.
Okay, let's do a sensible scale. The Milky Way galaxy,
Okay.
the one that we call home, our
Yep.
bestie, that's got about, let me just convert, 100 billion stars in it.
Oh,
Right.
that's many. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we use big, round, squishy numbers like that all the time.
Oh, that's intimidating.
No, it's good because the bigger the number, the less precise you are with it, really.
Yeah.
So when I say 100 billion stars, I don't know if it's 50 billion or 200 billion.
What's half?
Something
What's
really
what's a
freeing.
few bill? You know.
Yeah, something really freeing about astronomy in that way because we know almost nothing about anything. We don't really care about the details too much of something.
Yeah.
Like, there's no star accountant out there who's like, you're 5 stars short.
It's just so different to my area of research where everything is just like so precise.
Yep.
Like I'm measuring out, 5 microliters of a drug and it's just like you can't even eyeball
It's
that.
got to be
And
5.0,
it's
doesn't
like,
it? Can't be
you know,
5.1, are you?
Yeah, no,
Be
exactly.
cooked.
It's yeah, that's wild to me. Just being like, oh yeah, I could be a couple
Yeah,
billion
fucking-
off. It doesn't really matter.
It's all the
Whoa,
same, really.
okay.
Anyway, so
Cool.
yeah, if we wanted to simulate the Milky Way in Illustrious, we'd probably be able to cut it into 10,000 pieces, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And the simulators, there's like a whole nother field of these hardcore coding guys who are all about making a task like this manageable for a computer.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you do is like in more dense regions, when there's more stuff, you have more resolution. And in
Mhm.
less dense regions, there's less resolution. Which
Makes
is like
sense.
a really clever way of doing it. If you were like, I don't know, if video game designers took this into account, you could get away with like having lots of detail in the lots of pixels in the place where all the action's happening, and not many pixels.
That's sort
in
of
the
how
place where there's
video
less stuff.
compression works, I'm pretty sure, particularly with streaming sites like YouTube and Netflix and that sort of thing. Um,
I wonder if they got inspired by that.
yeah, I wonder, because they do it with like you'll notice if you've ever watched I don't know, do both of you guys watch Game of Thrones, or have you seen the latest season of Game of Thrones?
I have seen
Yep.
it, yeah.
So whether you watch that through a streaming service or whether you obtained it by slightly more nefarious means, point is if you're watching
No
a,
comment.
a more low-res compressed quality of it, even if you're watching it through a streaming site like Netflix, it's going to be a compressed file. That's how they're able to stream
Of
it.
course.
Any scene that's like darker in that, because there's less information in darker parts of video files, they kind of cut their losses and they put less video information in that. So quite often they'll just be holding
yeah.
some pixels there rather than like coming up with the new things all the time. Otherwise it's going to be so much needless data than what most people are actually viewing. So I found it when I was watching one of the episodes from the later seasons of Game of Thrones, where it was a very, very dark battle scene.
There was a
There was
very
a lot of
dark
stuff
one,
going on in
yeah.
the sky, and I found it looked like utter shit because the compressed
Yeah,
file I was watching,
I
it was just all pixels or something like that.
Yeah.
Now if you
A
had
lot of
like
people had that complaint.
yeah, if you had
Yeah, I
like the
personally
Blu-ray of
had that
that
same.
or something where it was like an uncompressed file, you'd see everything in the darkness, super, super crisp quality or like that, because it's taking these bits that normally in a video when it's dark, the shadows off to the side, bits where you're not going to be seeing the computer. It's like, oh, let's cut our losses. We don't need these pixels here. Let's just yeet them off. But it's doing that for this scene that it probably needed them. So, really
Yeah, it
high lit
definitely needed
scenes, they're going to look great, but dark scenes are going to look like shit in a compressed file because, yeah, that's why Blu-rays are going to look better than a streamed thing because usually
Almost like
they
physics applies
don't
to-
cut out as much. Yeah, so I imagine that's what they're doing with the simulation thing, cutting their losses with the bits that you're not going to be really looking down with a magnifying glass unless you're zooming in on that bit, and then they'll add in that resolution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just like that. That's a really good analogy. I'm just wondering now whether or not they did that on purpose to like try to discourage people from illegally downloading their episodes
Maybe.
and sell more
But
Blu-rays.
even if you streamed them, like streamed the episodes on authorized streaming sites, like what was it? It was Foxtel Go was playing it. We watched it through Foxtel Go, and it was still
Yeah, or if
shit.
you're overseas, HBO Go,
Yeah,
I
and
think
it was
is
still
the
crap.
streaming site it's officially on.
Cool. Today
so-
we're going to be talking to you about the dark episode of Game of Thrones.
Science.
So yeah, another thing that's probably worth mentioning is when you are building simulations, size and resolution is a major trade-off, right? Because like the more individual particles you have to simulate, the better your computer has to be, the more storage you need, the more time it's going to take, the more money it's going to take. So if you want a really big simulation, you use really big particles. If you want really small simulation, you use really small particles. So, for example, I've got a colleague who works simulating galaxy globular clusters, which are collections of about 1 million stars that are all tight together in a nice little glowing ball. Look them up on Google Images if
That's
you're
pretty cool.
if you're listening. They're really pretty. But for him, because there's only 1 million stars, the best simulations can have every single star moving around under their own gravity, with collisions and black holes being born and all this fun stuff.
That's
That
sick.
must need a chunky ass computer to run.
Oh yeah. So the computer I use does not do any of it. Instead, I basically secure shell into a computing cluster that I think Melbourne Uni keeps in a basement somewhere. I've never visited it. I just
Yeah.
use it. But it's
Love
it's
that.
really cool. Basically, you like type in what looks like an email address. You press send, and you email through a copy of yourself into this other computer.
A copy of yourself.
Yeah, and then you can kind of like touch things, move things around, use its massive processing programs.
Oh, kind of like
It's really good at
when you do remote controlling of someone else's computer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
exactly
remote
that.
desktop
Yeah.
It's
connection,
remote
yeah.
controlling their cluster computers, taking a few nodes of that, saying, okay, I need 1 day of time to figure out how this part of this model works. Here's all my data, which you can store, because you also need like, I think at the moment I'm using 200 terabytes of storage.
Oh, just a small amount.
Oh,
Yeah, just a small amount.
it's like hooking up to the cloud, but for science.
How
yeah.
much would this like computer cluster be worth?
I don't know. How much
You
is
don't wanna
100
know.
computers worth?
100 high-powered physics
Yeah.
computers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to know. I do
Yeah.
actually.
But,
I very
like,
much want to know.
People share it. Like, that's the other thing.
Yeah,
So,
true.
like, I know that Swinburne's got a really great computing cluster that they kind of let us Melbourne people on. These are all just words to
It's
you,
sort
aren't
of,
they,
well, how I'm imagining it is similar to like servers. If you're playing like a video game or something, an online video game, you're connecting to a larger server overall that's hosting all the players and running the actual game. And it's all kind of going from there, right?
Pretty much. So, yeah, I've basically got, we each kind of like, there's like a queue of jobs, and you can like submit a job to this queue. You'll be allocated a certain number of nodes for like the time that you've requested that you use it. If you requested too much time and you go over your time limit, it cuts you off.
Cheeky.
That's happened.
Mid-experiment?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So I
damn.
just, rerun it and said, instead, give me 10 days worth of time.
That's
It,
frustrating.
it could be
though.
related, it could be unrelated, but it's a bit of a tangent. It reminds me of something I heard about recently that Google tried to pull. So a video game thing, right? But rather than releasing it as a whole console, what it is, it's server based. So the idea is you can run any sort of high powered AAA game that would normally require either a really chunky console or a really chunky PC. But you could just play it off your mobile phone, you could play it on your tablet, you could play it or anything like that. And where the games are actually run is the big chunky Google servers themselves.
That's
So
fucking cool.
That's a
you
great
just
idea.
use your
Well,
phone to connect.
If you got a good internet
That's
connection.
the problem. That's the problem. The
Yeah.
console is only as good as your internet connection. So for a lot of people, they were having a really good time with it because they happen to be close to the server or they happen to have a really good internet connection. But for so many people, it didn't work out because their internet connection was really shitty or something like that. So overall, I can't even remember what it was called, and I didn't even hear about this on launch. The only time I heard about it was when I watched a video on it and how it flopped. So ultimately ended up flopping because for the majority of people, it didn't work out because it's so dependent on what your internet connection is. But
Yeah, there you go.
I guess, I don't know, is it a similar concept to that?
It's a similar concept,
Yeah.
but we don't have that problem because we don't need to do things immediately.
Right.
If I press queue this job and there's a 2-second delay between me queuing the job and the job being added to the queue, I don't care. It's an 8-hour simulation I'm trying to run. What's 2 seconds?
Whereas like in a video game, a 2-second lag.
It's death.
It's huge, especially if you're
yeah.
doing like online person v person stuff where milliseconds
yeah.
matter.
No.
Like, that
Yeah,
is
that's
no.
true.
Yeah, what other questions have you got?
Is the Matrix real?
Yes.
Fuck.
No, not
knew
yes
it.
is in the answer. It's like, yes, I was expecting this question
I mean, we can't have
coming.
someone on talking about simulations. We go into a philosophical tangent and we can't bring up the Matrix. Like,
That's
Are we
true.
living in a simulation?
Are we living in a simulation?
Thoughts? Opinions?
See, now I remember learning about this in high school and it being like a whole big thing. And I was very strongly of the opinion, I don't think it matters,
Yeah.
nor do I care.
I don't
This could be
care.
a simulation or this could be real. Like, my brain could be plugged into a battery right now, but like, I still feel the emotions that I feel when I act out my day-to-day life. You know, if something happens, if someone dies, I'm going to feel grief. If someone, you know, my life feels real to me. So if it is quote unquote real or not, like, why do I personally care? I don't. I'm still just going to live my life the same way and to the best of my ability, you know, to try and maximize positive emotions, minimize negative ones. I don't care if it's real. Like, you know, I'm already a brain in a skin sack. Like, that's kind of a matrix in and of itself, right? Like, consciousness is just housed within this like weird thing we call a body. Like, if that body is also then housed in a Matrix-esque battery system, like, whatever.
That answer
I don't know,
makes
that's
me
just, those are my
really
thoughts,
happy
but
because it gives me an excuse to bring up something. It's a philosophical belief that I weave into conversation anytime philosophy gets brought up, and now I have a chance to bring it up on our podcast.
Oh, gosh.
Epistemological solipsism. That
oh, don't bring up solipsism.
well, that pretty much
What's
is what
a
it
solipsism?
is. Well, solipsism is basically just like the whole, I guess, brain in a vat thing. It's just the solipsism on its own is
you
the
are the
idea.
only-
Yeah, anything outside of what you can directly observe ceases to exist, isn't real. And epistemological solipsism, epistemology being the philosophical study of knowledge, the idea of we can never truly know whether or not what we observe does continue to exist when we stop observing it, so it doesn't matter. You know, just
So
keep
it's
living
like
your life.
lack
Basically,
of-
what Kate was just saying, you know, it doesn't matter. Why should we care? We're going to keep living our lives anyway. I thought that was a very good, optimistic description of it.
Because it can, like, solipsism and that whole sort of philosophy can be taken very negatively.
It can often have a very nihilistic view on it, but I
Yeah,
think it doesn't necessarily
But I like
have
to think that the way
I think
what
it
was
doesn't
that?
necessarily have to have that negative spin.
No,
on it.
exactly.
Yeah.
I like to think the way that I approach life with that view is not really depressing. It's more, I don't know.
Yeah, so you both just nicely like dodged the question and jumped to the happy fun part at the end where you're like, it doesn't matter.
Okay,
Don't worry
well,
about it.
okay.
Humor me. Why not? Let's
Okay,
jump in.
Let's jump in. Sorry,
Let's-
Scientist Ben, are we in the Matrix?
Let's just hear the argument from like the person who did it, Nick Bostrom. Weird guy, thinks a lot about like the future and what it means that we're approaching it, and like AIs and like will they uprise, and Elon Musk loves his books. But basically his argument was that computers keep getting better over time, and that in time, maybe one day, we might want to simulate the past or old societies. Because why not?
Oh.
You know,
Yeah, that's
we
a
might get
whole-
bored. And then they were saying, you know, if you believe that, like, you know, consciousness is just a bunch of like things connected together and it just arises organically from that. If these computers are good enough, could the ancestors in this simulation be conscious?
There's a long, so computers might be getting better, but we kind of touched on this last episode when we were talking about hypnosis, but like there's a long way to go before we understand consciousness and therefore can simulate consciousness. Like, we are speaking from the like neuroscience community's perspective, we're a long way from understanding it enough to simulate it, I would think.
Consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a long way away. But then his argument was like, it's far future. So then one of these three things must be true. Number one, well, we will die before we get really good at computer simulations.
Well, we will, but
like
hopefully, well,
humanity.
actually, humanity will die. Well,
Maybe.
the way
maybe.
climate
Skynet.
Option
changes.
two.
Go on.
Option two, people in the future will have no desire to make ancestor simulations and simulate their past.
That feels unlikely.
But yeah, after this whole conversation, they fucking might. And option three, because simulations are run tens of thousands of times and all this kind of stuff, probably there would be more people who think that they are conscious at this time than are conscious at this time. And so odds are we're in a simulation.
True, because there are more simulations than there are actual universes. So statistically speaking, it's more likely for us to be in one of those many simulations than the real
Well,
universe
Kate, you
itself.
look visibly uncomfortable.
I talk a big talk about not caring, but suddenly you bring up this concept that statistically it is probable that life is a simulation right now, and I'm like all of a sudden uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know, because I've been so vehemently like, it doesn't matter, I want to feel good, so I'm gonna go feel good. But now I'm like,
Oh, but what if real,
boy.
though?
yeah, like it suddenly changes everything. God.
Yeah. So luckily I do have some good news.
Good, please.
There are some ways that people have thought of like, testing whether or not we live in a simulation or not. And one of the things that is really, really hard for computer simulations to do is things that are on like the quantum scale. When you deal with really small things, it's like really hard to predict how they behave. And there are certain effects that we have observed happening with like large sheets of particles, like 100 particles, which doesn't sound much. But apparently to simulate 100 particles doing this, you would need a computer that is built of more atoms than are currently in the universe.
Okay.
To calculate how this actually goes forward. If, the computers in the future are similar to the computers in the past, then this is probably. But then there's like the other thing that people say is that like if there was some like, if we were just simulated, there is no guarantee that the rules of physics in that universe are the same as the rules of physics in this universe. But now you're just getting
I suppose that
feels like cheating,
when you get to that stage, it's no longer science and it's more just philosophy and speculation and you can it's stuff that at this moment in time we don't have the variables or the information to form any sort of conclusive answer. It's just us coming up with our best guesses based on
not even it's worse than that. It's not testable.
Yeah.
If it's not testable, it's not science.
But it's simulatable.
You can only simulate down.
A simulation inside a simulation. It's Rick and Morty, we've come full circle.
Oh no, the circle. It's so full.
Wild.
Yeah. Does it matter? There are some people who are like, if we're in a simulation, then we should all like do our best to be interesting, to make sure that the person running the simulation doesn't turn us off. But like, we don't know what they want
but
if
also,
they exist.
Surely if we're a simulation and we get turned off, like, that's it. Like, we wouldn't feel...
You wouldn't suffer. Exactly. They're not going to, like, pull the fire lever.
That's my point, right? Like, if we got turned off, we wouldn't know. So we wouldn't care.
They're going to put you in the pool and take away the ladder.
Oh, no, I'm a sim.
But yeah. No, it's scary. It's scary. It's not scary. It's not a thing. But also, like, there are other theories that are like, if we're in a simulation, then we shouldn't go about trying to test if we're in a simulation or not, because if we find out that we are in a simulation, we're self-aware, they're going to shut us off. And I'm like, no, they fucking won't.
Not necessarily.
If I was in I had a self-aware simulation that knew that I existed, I'd keep that shit going.
That's true. That's actually very... Well, it's like that episode of Black Mirror where they had that Miley Cyrus was in, and they had the little Miley Cyrus doll. I don't know if you've seen
I haven't,
that.
but I know of the episode.
And they pretty much recreated her in the doll, but then the doll became sentient and could interact with... Anyway, I'm doing a very bad job of explaining it, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone that actually wants to watch it.
Cool.
But it's a similar thing. It's like it's a simulation of a human being that becomes then like able to like fuck yeah.
Have you guys ever heard of the thought experiment, the Chinese room paradox or something like that?
Yes.
I don't know.
Well, my understanding of it's a thought experiment that someone proposed a while ago that posits the idea.
Thought experiments do tend to come from
That's
people.
true.
Yes.
That
Often.
if we it's about AI, right? Because that's basically what this is. Simulated consciousness is
actually,
AI, right?
Yeah.
That if we've created a simulated AI, a simulated consciousness, we can never really know for sure if that is actually conscious or sentient, or whether it's just doing a really good job at pretending to be. The thought experiment is that there is a box and you can input it words in English, and then it will spit you out stuff in Chinese. I believe that's sort of how it goes, right? So you could, you could give it whole sentences, you can give it whole books, you can give it whole conversations, and it'll be able to translate everything for you into Chinese. So something that you could draw from this is the idea that the box knows how to speak Chinese. The box knows how to speak English. However, inside the box is a man who does not know a lick of Chinese, and I guess you could just say that he doesn't know a lick of English either. All he has with him is an English to Chinese translator book, and every
Yeah.
single word that he does, and I guess we could say it's a very sophisticated translator book that knows how to translate idioms and grammatical sentences and that sort of stuff as well. And all he's doing is he's looking at the input, he's translating it to the output just by following it. He's not absorbing any of this information, and he's just putting the output back, creating the illusion from the outside that this box does in fact know Chinese, that it is conscious, but in actuality, the box is just pretending to know how to speak Chinese. And we'll never be able to know what's actually going on there. So I guess that's the same idea with AIs and simulating consciousness. We'll never know whether or not they're actually being self-aware or actually being conscious, or whether they're just really good at pretending to be. Because I guess, like you're saying, from a neuroscience perspective, we don't know what consciousness is yet from a scientific perspective, you know?
I feel like this is probably way too off track already, but let's just keep going.
You know, we've got like an hour of content
Yeah,
already.
Gotcha.
you'll have to make some
It'll be
creative
fine.
decisions
It'll be fine.
regarding this.
Let's
But,
keep going down the
you'll-
rabbit hole.
you'll-
Cut out the box. Cut out the man. Is the book conscious?
Ah,
I mean,
no.
no, not is the book conscious. Does the books know how to speak Chinese? If it can translate any English phrase into any Chinese phrase, surely is that thinking? Is that counting? Like, that's the same question, right? A computer is like a tool that we can use to understand the universe, right? A book is a tool that we can use to understand the universe.
True, but the tool is useless without us doing anything with it. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper sitting there, you know, or a piece of silicone and
computer?
electricity sitting there. It's useless unless we give it the inputs and the outputs and we derive the meaning from it, you know.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just fancy looking paper.
This has gotten very philosophical for what is supposedly a science podcast, but I'm down.
There was some science at the start. I feel like we're just loosening up now. We're just going to keep going until the
That's
listener
all right. I was
question.
going to say we can shuffle across to the listener
I'll give you
question,
one
or is
more
there-
Yeah, give us
first.
one.
You
Man.
wanna-
Go on.
So,
Give
like,
us one
there's
more.
another idea. I talked to you about the view way back, like 30 minutes ago, about how you can view a simulation. You can view a simulation as a real experiment if you think of like the relations between objects as a definition of the object itself.
Right.
There is another way of interpreting it, and that's kind of like in physics, we often do these things, thought experiments, right? It's just like, you know, I'm standing on the side of the building, I'm holding a bowling ball in one hand and a tennis ball in the other hand. I drop them both at the same time. Which one hits the ground first? And that's like,
Was that a question that we're meant to answer?
nah,
The
Galileo
bowling
did
ball.
this.
I don't know.
Yeah, same time.
Actually, I knew that.
Yeah, gravity works the same on different objects.
Oh my gosh, I've just like discredited myself as the resident
person.
science
No, it's fine.
person of the show.
Just not the physics person.
I'm the resident science person now.
All
Bow
right,
down
that's
to your
it.
new masters.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this will be my last episode of Curiosity Killed the Rat. Benji will be taking over my
Welcome to
role.
the Ben and Matt show.
The Ben and Matt show.
No. Anyway, like you can think of that as like a thought experiment. And if instead you were changing the rules, so instead of two objects being dropped from a building, let's imagine 1 million stars floating around in space interacting under gravity.
That's a very easy thing for me to imagine.
Not for me,
Pop straight
but for a
into my brain.
computer, it's a really easy thing for them to do a thought experiment of. So you can
Yeah,
think of
okay.
like a simulation as a thought experiment where the computer is doing the thinking.
Ah,
And if you take that view, then all of a sudden simulations are just theory and they're not experiments. But then
Yeah.
other people are like, no, but you don't know what's going to come out of them until you do them, so they are experiments.
but I mean, we don't know what's going to come out of our thoughts until we think them. Am I wrong?
It's a valid
That's a good point, said really dumbly.
I prefer to think of it as lay speak.
Excuse me, I'm the layman of the show, and I will phrase it how I want. Sorry, that was my
Jesus.
I don't know what.
Go on.
What's
Suddenly
the word
a
for
real
racist for
poker.
people from Perth?
That's my Perth accent.
Oh, wow. Okay, we're
Sorry,
going to turn
Perth
this into an
people.
East versus West thing, are we?
Listener
I'm
question?
from
Listener question,
Canberra.
guys?
Oh, boy.
Okay, so before this descends into utter chaos, I'm going to shuffle us across to the listener
I think that's
question.
wise. We need some
I
authority.
think that's very
Oh,
sensible.
fuck me.
We've
We need some authority before this becomes anarchy.
it's. I feel like we're already a little too late, but you know,
I'd say
I'm
we're
gonna try to
less
salvage this
anarchistic and more just unchecked libertarian.
episode. If you must label us,
I must.
Sure. So, listener question. We had a listener question from Tim. Tim had a really cool question actually about the physical limits of the human body. So we're shifting away from space, zooming back in on the human body now, and looking at the physical limits of the human body under extreme circumstances. So like specifically what he wrote was, we hear all the time that athletes are at the peak of their physical performance, but then you hear about cases like a 15-year-old daughter lifting a car that has fallen and trapped her father. It raises the question of how far bodies can be pushed and the limits of our fight or flight response in responding to situations. So we've all heard these like stories, right, about like, you know, under high pressure situations, someone will lift a car off a human or do something crazy like that, or like in war, you know, soldiers will lift ridiculous, you know, they'll get these almost superhuman things and be able to do that. We've all heard of that, right? Yes? Yes? No?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're looking
I've heard
blank. Is it real?
I don't know if it's real or not.
Yeah, so it is. It's this thing called hysterical strength is the official term for what Tim's talking about.
Sounds
and
hysterical.
yeah, and it's defined because I too look up definitions. It's defined as the extreme or the superhuman strength that people demonstrate in life or death situations, and to an extent it's a real thing, but it's also very sensationalized by the media.
Of course.
So the basic premise is that, you know, the fear and the pressure of these life and death situations somehow, you know, give the person these super abilities beyond their normal possible strength. And of course the media is going to like eat that shit up, right? Like we as, you know, a world at the moment are obsessed with superhero movies. Like there's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the DC Cinematic Universe.
That
like,
doesn't count. There's a Marvel Cinematic Universe.
We love superheroes though, right? We'll eat up anything superhero. So if like a journalist can report someone doing something similar to that of a superpower, like, you know,
Incredible.
great, amazing, you've got a hook. And like there are heaps of stories about this, and I couldn't find this one about the 15-year-old girl that Tim mentioned in his email, but I did find one that was a very well documented case. It happened in 2006 in Arizona. Those are not important facts, but facts that I thought I would give you anyway. And so the story essentially goes like this. So there's a guy and he witnesses a cyclist getting hit by a car and gets like pinned underneath the car. And upon, you know, hearing these cries of distress and seeing the cyclist, the guy rushes over and lifts a 3,000 pound, so that's 1,400 kilograms, 1400 car off of this person for a full minute, so that the cyclist can be dragged out. So this is how the media reported it. And like, you know, these things are kind of, there are facts in there, right? The car did weigh that amount. The cyclist was rescued. The guy did do a deadlift and lift the car. But there's a few important facts to note here. So first of all, the guy, whose name was Tom Boyle Jr., thought I'd give him some credit because it's still a pretty good thing. He rescued a cyclist. But he was an experienced weightlifter, and he reported that he could deadlift up to about 320 kilos. So
Jesus
obviously
fuck.
that's not still that's still not the full weight of the car, the 1,400 kilos, but that's not a deadlift weight to be coughed at. Like the guy can lift. And then the second factor is physics, right? Leverage.
Yeah, that's
he
what I was
didn't
thinking,
pick up
right?
the car like a deadlift, like a standard
lean it on
deadlift.
two of its wheels.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. And so the weight is going to be distributed across the 2 or 3 wheels that are still on the ground. And plus you're only lifting the car up like a couple inches, like enough for the cyclist to be
not above his
dragged
head, mate.
out. Like he's not doing a full, but of course, you know, you don't, the way the media spins these stories is you leave those bits out. So claiming he lifted, you know, the giant car is definitely misleading. However, that is not to say that there is no science in this whatsoever, because there are actually things that can make us, they can't make us stronger than our, you know, full potential, and that's going to differ for everyone, right? So like a weightlifter,
Sure.
well, a well-trained weightlifter with trained muscles is going to be able to lift more than like a frail 80-year-old woman who has, you know, been sedentary for most of the last however many years, right? But there is some science that can explain why in these high pressure, extreme life and death situations, it seems like we gain strength. And like it's worth noting that this actually does happen in trained athletes as well. So like, you know, there's a reason why world records are broken at places like the Olympics and stuff. Events where the athletes are under the most pressure to perform, that's when they're going to perform better. And that's where the world records are broken. They're not broken in training. They're not broken at miniature events. They're broken at the big high pressure events. And that's because when your body is under pressure, a few different things happen. So I'm gonna break it down. So what happens when you're under a lot of pressure, or you're under a lot of stress, or you're in a life-threatening situation? Your brain sends signals to your adrenal glands to release a couple of hormones. So it releases adrenaline first of all, and cortisol. So what adrenaline does is adrenaline makes your heart rate go up, it increases your respiration. So essentially what it does, it allows more oxygen to get pumped to your muscles.
It's fight. It's flight. It's
Yeah.
adrenaline.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fight or flight is your sympathetic nervous system, which, like, adrenaline does play a very big role in. And then cortisol is another stress hormone, and what it does is it increases the amount of glucose in the blood, so sugar, essentially, energy.
Yum.
So you can get more oxygen and you can get more energy to your muscles. And then a third thing happens is that your body starts producing and releasing endocannabinoids. So that's essentially, like, you know, cannabinoids, they're part of cannabis, marijuana, and this is one of the reasons why medical marijuana is used is as an analgesic, as an anti-pain thing.
So are you saying that weed makes you stronger?
No, I'm saying that weed makes you feel less pain,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And we have the ability, our bodies have the ability to produce what are called endocannabinoids, which fit the same receptors as cannabis that you smoke, right? And plays this role of making you feel less pain. So when you're stressed, you're getting more oxygen to your muscles, you're getting more energy to your muscles, and also you're feeling less pain.
Sure. So the guy who was probably lifting that car didn't even feel it.
Like, well, he definitely felt it less than
felt
if he was
something,
in,
right.
just at the gym in a chill situation, right?
Yeah, is that
exactly.
the endocannabinoids there?
And endocannabinoids, and also we can make endogenous opioids to regulate pain at the source of pain. Our bodies are making drugs left, right, and center. Like, we don't even need to take them recreationally. Like, our bodies make this stuff.
I'm high on pain.
Pretty much.
That's
though.
the anthem
Well,
of Generation Z.
No, but like, seriously, you laugh about that, but that is why self-harm is an addiction. Like,
Oh,
literally,
shit.
people get addicted to self-harm because of the release of these, chemicals in our body that ultimately help us feel
Holy shit.
good. Yeah.
I'm learning stuff.
Oh,
Yeah.
dang.
Good. I hope so.
Yeah, this is great. I
yeah.
love this.
And so, like, our bodies are really cool. And so, yeah, it is a thing, but it's not as much of a thing as the media would like to make you think that it is, if that makes sense. So in terms of, like, coming back to Tim's actual question of, like,
Human body limits.
can you chuck a non-athlete into a life or death situation and will they perform better than a trained athlete? It's like, well, no, you can chuck, if you chucked a trained athlete into that same life or death situation, they would probably perform better than the average Joe. But the addition of stress to any given situation will increase what you can do. But there's still a limit to it, right? It's not going to give you powers that you don't have. It's kind of like that stupid myth that we like to shit on about, you're only using 10% of your brain, and if you unlock it all, you're amazing. So generally in our day-to-day, like, weightlifting life, we'll only use about 65% of our, like, muscle fibers. And the reason for this is the body likes to protect itself. We've got these
you don't
protective
wanna-
measures, and if we used 100% of our muscles all the time, you
stuff.
risk breaking ligaments and tendons and whatever. And, like, so it's a safety precaution. And so essentially what a stressful situation does is that it throws the safety precaution to the wind. It takes the child lock off of our muscles and lets us use our full potential. Yeah. And that's what this hysterical strength thing is. And it is real. But unfortunately, like, it's not something we can study super easily in
I was
the
going to
lab.
say,
Yeah,
like,
something you
it's
would
not
not
really
very-
ethical
Not at all.
to, like, throw some well-known athletes into life or death situations.
Exactly. So, like, the evidence that we have is, like, purely anecdotal, coming from these situations that have arisen, and also from our, like, we can study, similar to your simulations, right? We can study the stress response in the body.
Yeah.
And then we can infer from what we know about, the increased adrenaline, the increased cortisol, the endocannabinoids, and from that we can infer that this combination of things, if someone was in a life or death situation, would make them stronger, more motivated, fitter, faster, superpowered, whatever. But yeah, there's no rigorous scientific way to test
Could
this
it,
without breaking a ton of ethical rules.
Could
so.
an ethical way around it be if we feel we've reasonably determined what chemicals are involved in inciting these responses, like you were saying, the adrenaline, the cortisol, and the endocannabinoids. If you got like a hella fucking juiced up EpiPen that had the adrenaline, but also had
Stab
the
someone with some
cortisol and
hormones,
the endocannabinoids,
make it go for a run.
Yeah, be like, hey man, take some of this, try lift that, let's see what happens.
I mean,
See, so the problem with I don't know. I assume that if that was a thing that we could ethically do, people would have done it, and they haven't. So I think the reason is, like, the other thing, when you give someone like drugs or you know, a synthetic version of a hormone externally, the way the body processes it is going to be different to the way it was produced internally. Because if it's produced in the adrenal glands and then distributes itself that way, that's going to be different to if it enters another way. And that's like, you know, we have that problem with Parkinson's disease, the medication that we use to treat Parkinson's disease, the problem is that it can't cross the blood-brain barrier.
So you need needles straight into the brain.
No, so what they do,
No?
someone really clever came up with a solution where the drug you actually take for Parkinson's disease is a precursor to the thing that you actually need.
And that can
It
sneak
can
into
cross the
brain.
blood-brain barrier, and then the enzymes within the brain convert it to the drug that it actually needs to be, and then you get the treatment. So there are clever people out there working solutions, but these are the sorts of things that need to be overcome before we can start just like injecting people with random shit and see what happens.
That's not how science be anymore, sadly.
And also, it's not a very pleasant combination. Like, if you get a hit of like adrenaline and cortisol and like things that replicate a stressful situation, like that's not going to feel good for the person. Like, I don't know how many people are going to sign up to feel
Have some
like
anxiety in a bottle.
Yeah, like, well, that's what it is. I don't think you could get ethics to even recreate the internal situation of an emergency, right? Because that would be fucking horrible. I don't know.
You're talking about the blood-brain
Blood-brain barrier.
barrier. You're
Yes.
talking about athletes and doping. You're talking about things that can't cross it. Here is my question to you.
Okay.
If you injected straight into the mind parts,
Straight into the what?
straight into the squishy bits, straight into the
Right in the old
neurocortex,
brain hole.
Okay, so we're talking about a...
right in the adrenal gland. If you injected that with like some hormones that would make someone better at running and also couldn't cross the blood-brain barrier, would they just stay in the brain and not be detectable in a drug test?
Wait, so if you injected something into the brain...
Like, does the blood-brain barrier work both ways? Are things in the brain?
Oh, yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you're injecting someone something to make them run better, you need it to get to the muscles.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, first of all, it's going to be useless stuck in the brain.
Oh.
Second of all, the actual, like, you know, surgery required to get something injected that deep into the brain is definitely going to hinder your athletic performance for a good amount of time.
Yeah, you can just cut this bit. You know what I mean?
No.
This question,
I love this.
I had an
because-
idea. It didn't work.
I had my dumb moment earlier. You can have your dumb moment now.
It's reasonable.
I had my dumb moment too. We can all be
So
dumb
I
together.
think it's been a well-rounded episode where we've all been slightly smart sometimes and we've all been very dumb at other
We've
times.
certainly
the thing
gone
I don't
off
know
the
about
rails a number of
science
times,
is-
but I still think we've
You know-
we've definitely covered the topic of simulations pretty well. It's hard to go down that rabbit hole without being a little bit philosophical.
I enjoyed
That's
it.
why I
It was a
chose
bit
it.
of- yeah, you did this on purpose.
I was going to choose topology and not theory, but that's really bad in a medium that's not visual.
Yeah,
Like, it
true.
just sucks.
But
Nah, I think this has been good. This has been a lot of fun, and like I really hope you guys have enjoyed listening to it too. Remember, you can hit us up on curiosityrat@gmail.com if you want to send through a listener question, and we'll do our best to shoot it an answer. You can also find us on any of our socials at CuriosityRat on Instagram, Twitter, or Curiosity Killed the Rat on Facebook. Benji, do you want to plug anything of your own that you want people to know about?
No. I don't know. Catch me on Archive. That's where my paper's going to be once I've finished it.
I feel like
What am I to say here?
our main audience wouldn't be able to read.
do you have like
If
a
it's
Twitter
Instagram,
or an Instagram or a Facebook that you...
Shout out to Skyhopper.
Skyhopper, yeah, that's my little, my supervisor's making a tiny space telescope.
Oh, nice.
But it's not really much that the listeners need to know about that this episode.
I mean,
Maybe another episode.
and with that, like, thanks for listening, guys, and thanks for coming along, Benji. I hope you had a blast talking shit with us.
No, this is great. I'll do this for free anytime.
Yes, good, because we're not paying you.
Oh. That's fine.
Awkward pause where it's like, oh, there has been a drastic misunderstanding.
I have made
I'll take you in
an
pizza.
error.
We can order pizza.
Works for
What?
me.
I don't get pizza. Oh.
No, sorry, Matt.
It's a long Uber Eats. from Melbourne.
Come to Melbourne and I'll buy you pizza too.
Look, I mean, if I'm buying a flight, I might just buy the pizza myself.
Yeah, look, it's a cheaper
Pizza
option.
on the flight.
Oh shit, aeroplane pizza.
Aeroplane. Yeah, no.
No, it doesn't sound
Aeroplanes
good.
would find a way to ruin pizza.
Oh boy.
Anyway, with that, I think we're done and we should stop ourselves before we just talk forever and ever and ever. And we will catch you guys in a fortnight when we hit you up with episode 6 because we're on a roll and it ain't stopping anytime soon.
Snowball effect. It's only gonna get bigger and better from here. Self-pressure.
Yeet.
Let's do it. Goodbye.
Curiosity. Kill the rat. Curiosity. Kill the rat.